We've got Mike McGoldrick on the podcast. Mike is a guy who I usually see, several times per year at various fitness events. And whenever I see him, it's always great to talk shop and chat, and figured we'd record one of those conversations and actually put it out as a podcast. And I remember, Mike qualified for the CrossFit Games as an individual in, I think, 2013. And OPT at the time, which is now OPEX, released several weeks of his training kind of going into that season. I remember just downloading that PDF and studying it and trying to learn as much as I could from what was actually going on there. And Mike has had a really interesting transition where, he was a high-level individual competitor, then kind of transitioned out of competing, and that process of really sacrificing your life to be as fit as you possibly can. And he hosted the Barbell Shrugged podcast for about a year or so. And he also now coaches for Training Think Tank, which those guys are doing some really clever, creative, interesting stuff down there in Georgia, and also, always on the cutting edge of research and stuff like that. So Mike always has good information on the actual ins and outs of training, but he's also, moving from this highly competitive background to kind of not focusing as much on it, and then finding, again, a spot where he can actually be competitive as an athlete with the Training Think Tank team, which, just finished outside of the games qualifying spot a few years in a row, which stings a little bit. Sorry to pour salt in your wounds there, Mike. But very interesting just to hear his journey as far as, dedicating his entire life to competing and then finding some balance and being able to return to competition. So get on the email newsletter, toddneef.com, and check this out. The content creation for Training Think Tank has obviously improved dramatically. I think probably based upon your influence.
Man, I mean, I'd say the only influence I really had with it was helping, Chris come on board. Like,
yeah, for sure.
That's the guy with the content vision. Like, I always mess with him. Like, you just have the best radar of what looks cool.
Yeah.
Like he's just, he's so creative, and honestly, like, I just kind of a part of it and just along with the ride. Like, that's the guy that deserves credit for anything that's like beautiful that's put out on the internet. He puts so much freaking heart and soul and love into it. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like you can tell he has some sort of aesthetic sense that most of us don't have. We're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, he was a musician, and somehow got into the world of editing and creating, and it's funny because, like, we'll have conversations and he's so passionate about what he makes that, like, he'll make it and the next day he's like, I don't even want to look at it anymore. It's like already old, and like, I got to make something new again. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's still awesome.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also like a weird thing too, where like when you make something like that, I mean, I have no experience with like visual art on that level, but I know that, I play in bands as well, and like listening to your own music is weird. You're kind of like, you just hear all the stuff that like is a little off, or you're like, oh, that fill is rushed. Like, oh, I wish we had like kind of, we played that riff too long. Like, and you just kind of can go down a rabbit hole of sort of being like, that's all fucked up. We should have changed that, whatever.
Yeah, man, one thing I've learned that I've noticed about him that I think has helped him like develop his craft is how good he is at creating something, throwing it out, and really honestly listening to the feedback. Like he's not afraid to make something and it just be like total shit. And he'll put it out there because he was passionate about it, and just to try and see like what the audience picks up from it and whether or not they feed off of it. And he'll change, he'll change it and adjust to it. Like, I think you like have to do that to develop that, and you have to learn what people like to see and want to enjoy.
Yeah, I think that it's also a tricky thing with stuff like that, because you want to get feedback from the audience, but you don't want to be like super reactive to it, because people will tell you just like stupid stuff. For sure. And you have to be able to, you have to be able to like ignore what they're saying, because they probably don't actually know what they're talking about, but be able to figure out whatever insight is important from that. Actually, did you ever read that book, Creativity Inc.?
No.
By the Pixar guys? They actually talk about that. And
he actually talks about that book a lot.
Yeah, there's like a really great discussion on that, where they'll do a ton of screenings of the movies that they're creating, and they'll like, super harsh criticism. They'll get a bunch of feedback from like the other creators in the studio, all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of the same thing where they're like, okay, cool, your suggestions are poor and we're not going to take them. But the fact that all of you said something about like this part means that there's somewhere in the narrative that's broken, because this part clearly doesn't make sense. And like, all your ideas are bad. We're going to do none of them, but we're going to fix this part because it's clearly not working.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I should check that one out. I know definitely bring value to helping, throw in when I want to contribute making content with this guy.
Yeah, I definitely, I read it a while ago, but I think that was definitely the key takeaway for me, where I was like, that makes so much sense, where you just have to zero in on where the feedback is coming from and not take it literally. And that's applicable not just to like content creation or whatever, but just, business and stuff like that too, where people will complain a bunch about something and you're like, okay, I think the actual issue that you're complaining about is just like an overall poor control of logistics in the space. Like you're mad at this person, but like you should never be in the situation where you have to be mad at that person.
Right.
We've been recording all that, but
cool.
we should just roll into the
dive right in.
Roll into the stuff, man. So
this is a podcast interviewing me talking about CTP.
Exactly. It's getting very layered, getting very complicated. Yeah. So I think that for you, one of the things that you put out there, maybe last year actually, I'm not sure when you wrote this article, that I thought was really, really interesting, was just about your own journey as an athlete and kind of going from, initially potentially being unsure about how much you wanted to commit to competing in CrossFit as a sport, then really going all in, having some success with it, kind of pulling back out because you wanted to focus on coaching, and then sort of trying to figure out, what you actually wanted to do as far as how much investment you were putting in competition. So, I mean, just in terms of like, what that process has looked like for you, it sounds like there's a lot of emotion in both directions in terms of like both attachment to it and trying to let go.
Yeah, that's cool. You read the article. I hope you enjoyed it. I wrote it because I was inspired that there's not really anything out there that gives athletes a lot of information on what to do, like at the end of the journey, right? There's like some books, and I've read a few things. It's kind of funny, like a different tangent, but I've read some articles and stories about astronauts and how they cope with dealing with being at the end of their mission, because they get done and like, what am I now? Like, what's my identity now? Like mission's over. What do I go do with my life? And I feel like I myself kind of ran into that when I realized that competing at the highest level was kind of done. How do I continue to fulfill that like need to be challenged and find a level of competition that I can like still throw down in and feel, athletic and maintain some level of challenge in my life, but at the same time, like, I had to start balancing it because, you're getting older and like responsibilities start piling up, and you've got to, pursue some passion that's going to start paying bills that can allow you to, live the life that you want to live. So it was weird because I went so far one side where it was like, I'm done competing. That's not who I am anymore. It was like a big identity shift, and I went full board coach. And then I did that for a while and grew as a coach and loved it. But then I also had this itch and this constant calling to go back and do something competitively. And I would say it took me another year of, getting out of competing to realize like that's a big part of who I am. And like, whether or not you're competing at the highest level, it doesn't have to stop. Like, I feel like someone who's just competitive in nature, like, I don't think they're done with that. I just think maybe how much of it, how much out of your life it takes just changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that your point about just obligations and things like that stacking up is a big piece of it too, right?
Yeah.
That it's not always just age that kind of forces people out of being competitive. It's like, okay, I actually have to pay bills. And if I'm going to work somewhere that I can afford to be a human being, like I can't devote the hours required to train at, the top level.
Yeah, unless you're like the top one or two, male or female. They don't pay a lot, so like assuming that if you're making a little bit of money in sponsors and doing those things for a couple of years is like going to be a career for a long time is kind of a mistake. You need to start building some infrastructure and like setting yourself up to look down the line at like, what are you going to be assuming, what are you going to be at the end of that journey when you're no longer able to be competitive enough where you can get paid to do it, or, you get hurt, so I think I want to help athletes develop themselves meanwhile as they're continuing to grow as athletes, but also helping make sure that they do have some infrastructure built for when that time comes to an end. Because a lot of them are just left out to dry and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. And something else that comes up with that is when people are training, they're very focused on setting personal records and improving themselves and being like, all right, this was my pace last time. I need to hit this. This was my PR split jerk. I need to hit 5 pounds more than that, or else I'm not a valid human being. Right. And for, someone potentially coming down on the other side of like, you know what, I may never actually hit a personal record on anything ever again. Right. That I would count myself in that group. I was never, a particularly high level competitor, but I was like decently fit and treated CrossFit as a sport. And I just don't at all anymore. And I don't think I'll ever, touch numbers that I was hitting several years ago. So, that's like, why bother continuing to train?
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're focusing on needs to shift. If it's just about the numbers, like, yeah, you're right. At some point, like, you can't fight physiology, and like you're going to have some regression in your, in your benchmarks. Like, that's just something that you'll eventually have to deal with. Most people, everybody, no, I don't say most people, everybody. But that doesn't mean you can't continue to perfect the craft of training and the art in training. Like, you can always get better at movement. You can always choose a different avenue, explore gymnastics. Like, taking other avenues more serious can still be very challenging and competitive. It can bring like new life and fire back to your training. Now, I personally have gone down that route where I was I would say like a movement athlete for about a year or so, and I really enjoyed it. It made my body feel good. I got out of pain, and I took that training very seriously and was competitive with myself in that. But then I also understood after that year that, like, man, I really want to get back into trying to beat other people. Like, that's kind of what drives me and really like puts pressure in my training. Because I mean, honestly, I'm the kind of person without pressure in my training, I just don't feel like I'm putting the same like heart and drive and passion into it. It's hard to try and get better at anything without pressure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That you're able to potentially switch the quest to something else, right? That, okay, my quest is no longer to clean and jerk this amount or finish somewhere in the open. It's to perfect my movement patterns and to be able to get this certain flexibility benchmark or something like that. You can kind of like give yourself new things to work on. But it sounds like for you that you kind of went down that path and are like, you know what, I just want to win. I want to beat people.
I think it shifts. Have you ever read the book, The Art of Learning?
Is that the Josh Waitzkin book? Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So one thing he says in it that I thought was really interesting, and this is, he was talking about training for chess. He has periods of time in his training where his training and his goals and his performance are introspective. So he's really like working on perfecting his own craft. He's not focused on competition. And then he has phases where he is only focused on competition and beating others. And I honestly feel that like my training has gone in the same waves, and I see it with other athletes. And I think it's a mistake if you don't recognize that sometimes and you try and fight it. Like sometimes you need to understand, like, it's time to pull away for a little bit and not worry about just beating people all the time. You need to focus on yourself and be more introspective with it. And I think you'll just find a much better training flow that way. Yeah,
I think that's a good point too about the ebbs and flows in training of that it's kind of like party line to say, you know what, like, focus on the process, never compare yourself to others, like only do what you can do, etc., which I think makes sense in the sense that a lot of people tend to overly focus on others and get overly competitive and sort of sabotage themselves. So trying to get people out of that is helpful, but it's dishonest for just about everyone to say that like they never pay attention to their competition. It's like, yes, you do. Like, you're competing in the open. You have to finish top 20 to go to regionals. Like, you need to know what you're doing. Like, what are you talking about?
You have to have that kind of pressure, because regardless of whether you want to or not, you've got to beat these numbers. You've got to have XXX numbers to be competitive at this level. So I think people just speak in absolutes with it. You can only think of training in this way where you never compare yourself to others. And I'm like, no, like, go back and forth between the two. It's not one or the other. It just changes.
Yeah. And almost like periodizing it, which I'm not sure if you can necessarily have, total control over your emotions to always periodize them appropriately, but recognizing that there are times throughout, a competitive season or a competitive career to be more like, okay, I'm stepping back and I'm focusing on myself and I don't want to pay attention to leaderboards or like specific numbers. And then other times where it's like, okay, I'm going to hit this, and then that's going to put me in this position, and then I'm going to win.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. You said periodizing. We use a lot of self-regulating strength programs now, where we base it off, week to week, how the person feels and the loading and the percentages that you use. And because you can't just put people in a box and assume that they're going to be linear and stuck on this specific pattern that you have a plan for. And I think that your training cycles kind of run in the same way. Like, you can't assume that everyone, that starts a CrossFit career is going to be good to train for 9 months, or basically the season's like 9 months long. You have 3 months off season. You can't assume that they're all just going to fit perfectly into that. You're going to have people that come and go and need a year off and need to have a year where they go team instead of individual. So I think you're just learning to listen to the signs, what your body's telling you. And, if you don't find yourself having full heart and passion in it, like, switch it up.
Yeah. And how do you,
the mistake I made for a while was, I competed individually for like 8 years instead of paying attention to like, man, like this year I should probably like pump the brakes a little bit and go join a team. And, that would have probably prolonged my life in the sport.
Yeah, and how do you teach athletes to have that level of self-awareness and that ability to step out? Because I think that everyone who has kind of gone down like a negative rabbit hole of like overtraining or like feeling like shit or beating themselves up kind of learns that lesson, but it's the hard way, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, like everyone says don't do this stupid thing, and I just thought I would be fine, and then I realized that I'm not fine.
Yeah, I don't ever want to say that I want someone to go through that intentionally, but I don't know, can you learn the lesson without going through it? I think you have to. It's like an injury. It's like, how are you going to tell someone to cope with an injury if you've never dealt with it yourself? Like, you don't know what it feels like, the emotional stress, the patience that it takes to understand that, I'm okay if I don't go in the gym right now. Like, it's not going to ruin my life. Like, I'm going to have a very small amount of loss in performance. Like, I feel like the only way to kind of deal with that and understand that and be able to teach someone that is to actually have gone through it yourself. So, yeah, I don't know. How do you teach someone that? I think the biggest mistake is if they go through it and they don't understand why it happened and learn from it, more so than trying to actually avoid the mistake itself. Because I think if you're too careful and you're trying to avoid too many things, like, you're just too careful in training.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, that they need to have that experience to learn from it, and that they're not going to listen to you as a coach until they start to see something potentially, going wrong for them in their bigger picture development as an athlete, or they're realizing that they're not competing at the level that they want to, and that, until they start to have that experience of like, okay, this is not going the way that I think it should be. Like, let me get your advice. That they're not gonna have the capacity to hear what you're saying, even if you are like, hey, listen, like, sometimes it's helpful to take a step back. Sometimes it's helpful to not be competing all the time, et cetera. That, they need to sort of learn it themselves.
And sometimes all you can do is tell them what you think, and they, like, some athletes are rogue. They gotta actually feel it for themselves for them to fully understand and buy in. And, like, that's just the nature of different personalities.
Yeah. And for you as someone who coaches athletes yourself, how does that play in with your own training, right? It can be difficult to train yourself when you have the capacity to sort of be hyper analytical about what's going on. Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, so I like to think I've gotten better at it. I've done it the last 2 years. I've been at regionals and then competed the next weekend, and I've balanced it. And for a while, I really struggled with the idea that I could do both. I was 100% convinced that you just can't be good at either one if you're doing them both at the same time. And I think this year I finally had like a come to moment where I was like, man, like, I think that actively competing is what brings some value to my coaching, because I'm actively in the sport. I understand what they're doing in these workouts. And this is relative to people that are competing in CrossFit. Like, I understand the pressure of the open. I understand preparing for regionals. Like, I understand the workouts and the movements that they're doing. And that, to me, like, for a second, I was like, I don't know how much value I'd be able to bring or how I could match this if I wasn't involved in it. For a while, I was like, well, maybe it's taking quality from time that I'll be able to spend, maybe focusing on writing better training designs, putting more time into researching and more effort into providing, basically a better service for my clients. But my service wasn't lacking. I feel that I just knew the sport better because I'm actively doing it. So I went back and forth on it, and I would say, really, man, like, just being very structured. Like, I had to learn to make the best out of the time. Like, when it's training time, like, that's the cap that's on my head. And when it's not, like, it's coaching, So being very disciplined with that was something that's taken a few years to kind of develop. In terms of, like, the training itself, Max used to write my program design from 2016 to 2017, leading into regionals when I did team last year. And after that, we made a decision for me to take it over for myself. and it was really uncomfortable at first, and it was chaotic, and I overthought the shit out of it. I don't know if did you have a coach, or had you have a coach prior?
Yeah. So Michael Fitzgerald writes my training.
Okay, cool. Have you written your own design before?
Not in any time where I like actually knew what I was doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a nightmare for a few months. I was like way overriding it. I had all this stuff, and I was just like, why is this any harder for myself than the other 25 people that I coach? You know, like I don't get it. And then I just learned to be more flexible with it. And as I started just trusting myself more with understanding my body, and like I've done this for a long time, I know, like I feel like I have a really good idea on what my body needs. I just got more loose with it. So it was less writing out every single workout, you know, to full detail every day, and feeling pressure and stress because if I like divert from that at all, then I'm not following my program. And more about going in the gym, having a general idea of what the focus is for that day. It removed a lot of the pressure, and I was able to just have better training sessions, because then it allowed more flexibility for me to work more, you know, like I'm able to get in, spend a really solid hour focusing on what the goal is for that day, and then get out and get back to work.
Yeah. And does your training then, is it not actually written in terms of like literally what you're doing for a given day? Is it more like I'm going to work on single leg stuff, or like how much detail are you giving yourself?
For a while, it was extremely detailed. I mean, I would write a month out and then like adjust it week to week based on how that week went. Now it's more, I write in like microcycles. So I'm going to do a team partner competition in a couple of months with Kyle Ruth, one of the coaches here. I'm traveling. I leave tomorrow to go to Alaska for 10 days. So I just kind of write like based on a timeline. I have to have something to kind of aim for that's more short term for me. And, you know, I just, as long as I pay attention to like the time between regionals and now, after regionals and now is the time for me to kind of build, you know, some base work and make sure that my shoulders are healthy so that I can come time for the open season that, you know, I'm able to start handling that kind of volume again that's necessary for like the contractions that come up. And I know that if I don't do that kind of work now, there's no time to do it going into the season, because you just got to train with more intensity and I believe more sports specific work. So I would say it's as general as that right now and as broad as that, where I go in and I just honestly base it off feel, but with the idea of like it's not, you know, pure CrossFit Metcons all the time. I do make sure to like touch that every like 7 to 10 days or so, just so I remember like how to hurt. I remember how to deal with chaos. I think that's something that I've made a mistake in the past, that athletes probably need to maintain touches on year round, instead of it being like 3 months without any CrossFit touches. We're just going to do all this like human body building fitness work. And then all of a sudden it's like you just start throwing CrossFit at them again. They hadn't done it so long. And like you spent 3 months not getting them better at the sport, you know?
Yeah, I think that's something that there are some people who are just so talented at doing quote unquote CrossFit that they can step away from it. But if you're not one of those people, and like you said, you pull it out for a few months because you're like, all right, we're going to work on weightlifting and like aerobic work or whatever. And then you put it back in, and then it takes them you know, potentially months to get back to the point of like being able to tolerate thrusters and rowing.
Yeah. So personally, like that's a good point. Like I've noticed that touching on, you know, Olympic lifts is not something that I need to do that frequently. Like I remember last season when we started kind of gearing up for the Open, we started doing, you know, like some fatigue based tests where you would do a lift after like a Metcon. And, you know, I was like hitting 95% of my snatch without doing any snatch work for a few months. And I'm like, okay, like that's probably fine. But the Metcon, you know, I hadn't done like a 20-minute AMRAP in like 3 months. And it was like, I was a fish out of water. I was like, my pacing was terrible. I was uncomfortable. You know, I mean, naturally, like CrossFit's hard. It's going to feel like that. But I was not as comfortable as working with the bars, just because of how unnatural it is. And I feel like that needs way more frequent touches.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So on-site training for you guys at Training Think Tank, I mean, there's a bunch of very high-level athletes all in the same building. What is that dynamic like? Are you guys training together? Are you guys talking shit to each other and razzing each other the whole time? Is it super focused and competitive? What's the deal? There's
so much shit talking. It's awesome.
Good.
I played hockey for 12 years, so like to me, like everything is locker room talk. I love it. And it's just my way of showing love, you know. I just like to go at it with people, and you know, Max, everyone, Travis, like it's a good time. Everyone knows when it's time to get to work, but at the same time, we're making sure that the time between that is fun and we're enjoying each other, and the environment is friendly and positive. I mean, it's amazing. Like on so many different levels, being able to go in the gym, you know, even if I'm going to do my own design, having someone else out there who's taking it very seriously, their own design. Like I would say the time between now and getting into like October, November, it's pretty individual in terms of like people working on their own shit. And then as we start gearing up, getting closer to the open, we start doing more stuff together. You know, we start like Saturdays or Wednesdays will be, you know, a day where everyone does the same workout just to kind of compare and start getting a competitive environment again. I feel like doing that year round is like really aggressive. You gotta have, I feel like you have to have some time away from it, but you know, it kind of goes in cycles and it just kind of naturally starts showing itself a lot of your planet. And then the other side of it is, you know, this isn't necessarily training, but you know, being in an office with 8 to 9 other coaches some days where I'll have a question about a workout that came out for, you know, maybe an athlete of mine is doing a competition and I can get 8 or 9 different ideas like bounced up on the whiteboard on how they should approach it. Like being able to share different ideas with that many people who are actively involved in the sport and other sports to share different opinions is like, I mean, it's invaluable.
Yeah. How do you guys balance the, like you mentioned, some of it happens naturally with competition, but anytime you get a bunch of high level people together in the same area, they tend to compete with each other, right? And that sometimes that can become toxic as well, especially in a sport where there are, you know, okay, 20 people get to go to regionals and like you might take my spot, or now we have 4 people on a team instead of 6. So one of us is probably not going to get to play this season and you are taking my spot. You know, what dynamics have you seen with that and how do you guys attempt to balance that out?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough in here because majority of the athletes that train on site here, and especially people that come in and visit, all compete in the Atlantic region, you know? So, like, they're all fighting for the same spot. But, I mean, it's weird, you know? At least I haven't seen it. It may be all said behind, you know, someone's back or whatever, but I haven't seen any people, like, trying to throw someone else under the bus. Like, we're an organization and we're a brand that I think people are proud to be a part of. So, you know, they're teammates, you know? Like, you see, you know, Noah qualifying this year and Travis not making it, Travis still showing up to help him train this summer. Noah cheering for Travis to, you know, do his best to try and finish to qualify this year at regionals. Like there's still a lot of support. And I think that we all understand that it's all better to be on top together than it is to be alone. So everyone wants everyone to succeed.
Yeah, I think that's a tough thing in sport is that it's better for everyone long term to all be on the same page, right? That improves everyone's ability to train and to get better and to sort of like learn from other people who are potentially better than them. But it's potentially worse for them short term because they might lose and they might lose a spot to someone else. And being able to have people around who can go to that higher level and see, you know, that they should be focusing on the long term outcome, that's you know, that's tough, but it speaks to the organization itself to facilitate that.
Yeah.
So with the other coaches around, I think that's, you know, a similar dynamic, maybe not as competitive, obviously, since it's not like, you know, coaches are taking regional spots from each other. But, you know, what does that dynamic look like with, you know, reviewing designs with each other and actually talking about like, hey, like here's some ideas and all that kind of stuff. Like, what have you picked up from being around these other top coaches?
Man, good question. Really just, I guess, start to finish, seeing how someone works with a client to build a relationship and then how they approach attacking like that specific goal, you know, and going into like the nuance of the design. Like, I would say a lot of people here, like built from the same, you know, cloth or cut from the same cloth, like learn the same structure and ideas. But in terms of the approach of how, you know, one athlete, you can give them, they want to get their cleanup, taking 3 different approaches. It's fascinating seeing 3 different coaches take 3 different routes for that. So I don't know. I'd say the most, you know, valuable thing here is if I get stuck in a way of thinking, you know, if I have a client that I'm struggling to get them over a strength plateau or something, and I'm just stuck in my same ways of thinking and I just don't have new ideas generated, man, going and asking questions and like they'll bring up a new perspective that I'm just like, shit, like, you know, I didn't even think of that. So, I mean, you just can't replace that.
Yeah. Do you have an example?
A specific example? I mean, I would say like strength designs, you know, getting people stronger is one of the most popular things in, you know, in this sport, in this area. Like everyone wants to get their back squats up and their snatches up. So I'm drawing a blank on like a specific athlete, but I would say like, you know, I go to Evan Piken, for example, and I say, look, I've been trying to get this guy's back squat up for years. He's heavily trained. What other approaches have you taken with people to try and, improve their 1RM? That something I maybe haven't seen, like beyond, any like linear progression or undulating, whatever. And he's like, oh, I'm working on these new strength protocols where it's self-regulating. This each week, we don't base it off of a certain percentage. We base it off percentage effort and how they feel for the week, and we just add off that. And I'll try it. We'll be experimental with it, and sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't, and you move on to something else.
Yeah, I think that's especially with training for something like CrossFit that has so many variables too. It's so difficult to tell what is actually working, even from a design perspective, because you're like, oh, we're going to try this back squat cycle, and it worked or it didn't. And you're like, well, you moved and broke up with your girlfriend and lost your job. So
man, there's so many other components in it that you look at the results and you want to blame the design, but in reality, there's just so many other factors that probably affected it. Yeah, that's the man. CrossFit's a hard thing to coach, because it's a moving target, it's a changing sport, it's a growing field. And you're just blending all these other ideas and principles and trying to make sense out of all of it, assuming that because you're training one system that the other system's not going to be affected. It's really difficult to learn. It's difficult to learn and see what's working.
Yeah, because you can't really separate out variables and like conduct real experiments. So you don't know. You're like, all right, well, that worked and that didn't work. And there's literally dozens, if not more, reasons why it could have gone either direction. So
which is why I've grown more confident in being more loosely structured with my designs, at least with higher level athletes. The beginners, people that are kind of untrained and probably need more structure and basic principles to follow, like I still stick with that pretty strong. But higher level athletes where they just need to, you gotta continue to find new ways to challenge certain skills so that they're prepared for not just being better at 30 muscle ups for time, but being better with a weight vest, being better with it after running a mile, like all these different variations you have to throw at them. You can't just focus on like, I've made the mistake of like just being like, all right, your 30 muscle ups for time is bad. Like we need to just focus on that test and get better at it. It's cool to check progress in those things, but like putting too much focus in it is a waste of time and training. There's so many other things that are going to come up that you have to make sure are getting touched on.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, that those sort of classic tests like that can also not even necessarily be, like you mentioned, reflective of someone's performance when they're actually competing, even if it's a similar test. Probably at the games when they literally did 30 muscle ups for time, it's like, yeah, you should probably know how you're going to do on that. But that even something with, 30 muscle ups mixed in with something else or split somehow, it's like, the person who has the best 30 muscle ups time is not necessarily the person who's going to win that, even if it seems like they should.
Yeah.
It's very messy and very complicated.
That's why I love it. It's a constant challenge and it's super fun. I don't know. I coach other athletes in other sports and other fitness sports, and I enjoy it. But the challenge that CrossFit brings is, I don't know, it's exciting. I like that I have to constantly update and change my systems of how I, interview and assess and write designs for people. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not getting so stuck in a structure and a routine that I feel like I've got it figured out and this is just how I'm going to coach people forever. Like, I'm very excited to go on this trip for 10 days because I'm closing the computer and I can't wait to come back with new, fresh perspective and ideas on how to, build better relationships with my clients, write more efficient training designs, cut the fat, and just keep things simpler and just constantly refine it.
What are you going to do? Go fishing?
We're going to Alaska. We are going to go hiking, backpacking, fishing, just do it all.
Are you going to hang out with the grizzlies?
I'm going to try.
Have you seen Grizzly Man?
I've never.
Grizzly Man? Yeah, when do you leave?
Tomorrow.
Maybe you shouldn't watch it before you go, but it's an incredible documentary about a crazy person who went and like literally lived with grizzlies.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, it's
didn't they end up mauling him and killing him?
Yeah, there was one bear that ended up being I'm not sure
That's a surprise ending.
Yeah, right. But it's a Werner Herzog documentary, so it has like a hilarious touch of like darkness and comedy, and it's just super well done.
Cool. Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll watch it on the way there.
Yeah, it'll prime you for some Alaskan adventures. Do not do what Timothy Treadwell did.
Okay. One of my clients told me the other day, he's like, if you're in the wild and you see a bear, remember, if it's brown, lay down. If it's black, fight back. But if it's white, say goodnight.
There you go.
I don't know what I would do if I saw a polar bear.
Yeah, that's a clever, very clever rhyme.
Yeah.
Beer before liquor, run away from grizzly bears.
Yeah, pretty much.
So something else I want to ask you about is, I think we talked at regionals about some like breathing dynamic stuff where, you've been digging into some ideas surrounding like breathing and the mechanics of that. And that, within Training Think Tank, a bunch of you coaches sort of have different areas that you're sort of, focusing on and trying to spread ideas within the team. What have you been researching and learning about all that stuff?
I would say more specifically, it's called IMT, inspiratory muscle training. Really about training the inspiratory muscles in the system that works on taking deeper inhalation. So there's a really good book called, I think, Breathe Strong, Perform Better, that I read that, look, there's a bunch of different ways to look at the respiratory system and what the limitations might be. And I wanted to look more into it because of how inspiring Evan Piken's work is. Are you familiar with Coach Evan Piken up here?
I am, yeah.
He's put out a lot of work with, the Moxie testing that he's doing. And basically, there's different physiological tests that you can come to conclusion on with the Moxie test that tell you where your limitations are, respiratory system being one of them. So I wanted to dive in a little bit and figure out, all right, what are some of the things that I could train with these athletes that have respiratory issues? Really, is it anything that we could add to the training to bring value that really wouldn't take a lot of time out of the training? And IMT training is one of those things that I've experimented with and actually seen some pretty good results with clients. So really just training the system to train the muscles to be able to resist fatigue longer, right? Whether it's under load or during an endurance type setting where you basically can continue to inhale and expand the thorax and keep taking in deeper breaths, right? That's only one aspect of it though. There's other variations like expiratory strength, being able to actually blow off more CO2, which is a completely different thing to train. So just to focus on that, we use the power lung a lot. We use a lot of banded resistance breathing. So you take a really long knee wrap and you can wrap it around, the lower ribs and work on actually training the inspiratory muscles to get stronger and actually resist fatigue a little bit longer, which should translate into better breathing mechanics while, doing any type of workout. I put clients through 12 weeks of it where we just basically started with really simple progressions on teaching them proper diaphragmatic mechanics. And then we progressed with adding loading, adding different variations where you're in challenging positions, where you're braced, where you're suspended, and just really tried to focus on seeing if there was not necessarily trying to make them better at the test themselves, because I don't want to do that. I don't want to make them better at breathing tests. I want to see if it actually felt better in training and in workouts. And yeah, I would say it was overall everyone just felt better. They're I can just feel I can open up my ribs more. I feel I know how to warm up better now for endurance-based workouts.
Yeah. So with all that stuff, then I think that, you sort of mentioned that there's a bunch of different limiting factors potentially for someone in a mixed modal piece, right? Is it a muscle endurance limiter? Is it actually their ability to take in oxygen? Is it, just a pacing error? All these different things can really impact them differently. So if you're trying to train, in this case, those sort of is it more strength or muscle endurance for the respiratory muscles?
So in the short term, or I guess, so training the strength of the inspiratory muscles, what you want to do is make sure you find the difference between, is it my lack of ability to actually expand my rib cage and then actually have strength at in range? So, if you're someone who's using a bicep curl, for example, you can flex the bicep, but if you can't actually flex it in range, you're losing that little bit of motion. They say that in inspiratory muscles, when you're actually trying to train them and actually develop strength, that a lot of people lack that in range. So that's a way of training it, is actually thinking of using a power lung or a resistance breathing device where you're really focusing on strength of the inhalation. And then the endurance side of it is actually working to prolong the fatigue that comes in with maybe like the shortness of breath over time. So how you train them is a little different though. So you want to use resistance to actually train the strength of the inhalation. And then to resist fatigue, you need something like a Spiro Tiger where you have to train for like a very long time, where you're actually like putting it in an endurance type setting and you're breathing for, 20 to 30 minutes. So on like very low level of resistance.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's essentially both concepts are valid, that you may want to try to both increase the range of motion of someone's ability to breathe, make that range of motion stronger, and then if they have that base of support, that you want to delay the fatigue as long as possible before they end up falling into some sort of compensatory breathing pattern when they are actually fatigued in like a conditioning type of setting.
Yeah.
Got it. And then based upon that stuff, is that something that you see being helpful more with like monostructural pieces like running and rowing and biking, or is it something that's helpful in like mixed pieces where it's all mixed together, or is it just kind of like general stuff that we want to lay this foundation of good movement quality specifically with breathing for just about everything that you do?
I mean, yeah, I think all of it really. I would say like the book that I read, Breathe Strong, Perform Better, it's got a lot of examples on multi-sports, like especially like, take hockey, for example. If you're wearing heavy shoulder pads and your chest is compressed, so you need to train the ability to actually fight against that, the resistance and the load of that gear. So, it could be worked. It could be useful in that type of setting, the endurance type setting where, let's say you're a runner who has really poor postural endurance and you want to like basically train the thorax to be strong enough to stabilize and be able to continue to open up as you breathe. People may like tend to slouch, or same thing like on a rower. So I think it translates into a lot of it. I think what's important is that you train those specifics and then what you're trying to get better at. So like, I'm not just going to have someone lay on the ground and just do power lung work. I like to actually mix it in and make sure that it does touch on some of the specifics that they're trying to improve. So, we've had some where we have people like do thrusters with them, where they're like loading a bar. We have some where they do, like bridge support holds on the wall, or go hang from a totem bar, or go hang from a bar like in a totem bar extension position with your feet on the ground, and you're working on like really trying to drive in air in that position. So really just trying to make it more specific to it, and just being creative with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah. It's not just, okay, we're going to work on this, movement. We're going to try to actually get you able to utilize the stuff that we're working on in the actual positions that are demanded from the sport.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it comes down to the assessment too. Like when I look at someone, like before you go and add that kind of level of complexity to it, like they may better breathing mechanics in general. Like they may not know how to take like a deep diaphragmatic breath, and like don't know how to coordinate, the abdomen with the ribs expanding and back and forth. So before you want to add like loading and all these complex variations to it, like make sure that the breathing mechanics and that there's not any like serious soft tissue restrictions or like really poor posture. Like those are some of the simple things you would focus on first. And which I wrote the movement course we just released. I wrote a 12-week IMT program, and basically the first 4 to 6 weeks of it are like foundational work like that, where it's teaching someone how to breathe with good posture, how to breathe with good timing, just to build the basics first. And probably like for most people, like that's going to be very, very beneficial.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, that this stuff is potentially additional training that you can do that isn't going to add like a ton of load. It's not like, okay, cool, and I'm going to do an additional 100 burpees per week and 200 more wall balls. It's not
as
just
far as
adding.
I know. Yeah, these progressions are pretty short. You're talking like 30 breaths for 2 sets that are very aggressive. When you get into like the Spiro Tiger and the endurance training of the tissues, like that can be kind of taxing. Like Evan knows way more about training the endurance side of it than I do. But he's often talked about like how dangerous, how much of a hazard it could be training like heavy respiratory work and doing the power lung at the same time. Like you're just going to really tax the respiratory system. It's not going to be able to recover in time. Yeah. But in terms of like the shorter IMT, which I would call like more strength work, I haven't seen anyone that has a negative consequence from doing that with their training yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about, I guess, overall movement quality, since a lot of folks end up with pretty dysfunctional breathing patterns, which can also be sort of tied in with pretty dysfunctional stability patterns, right? Like a ton of overarching in the low back, like weird scapular dynamics, all that kind of stuff. Do you see any of this work helping them find better stability patterns, which then result in them moving better as a whole? Or are they just not, is it not that tightly linked?
I think it is. If it's more of a cueing issue than something that's like actually structural, because it just takes a lot of time to try and fix someone's structure, you know. And to be honest, like I am still like combating ways and, you know, studying and, you know, watching the movement material that we create to try and figure out ways to make that easier and faster. But in terms of which one are they connected? Yeah, I think so. It's just, again, like, what is the major issue? Is it that, you know, their posture is like really fixed in that position and it's been that way for a very long time? It's just some breathing drills may not fix that for quite a while.
Yeah, it's not always that simple. And even if you do potentially fix their breathing strategy or, you know, improve some of their postural issues or something like that, that doesn't mean that that's going to be, you know, their default when they're grinding through a squat clean that they caught a little forward and they're trying to stand it up. It's like, well, you're just gonna default to whatever is going to get you through that movement, no matter how many breath drills we did.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we do a lot of positional breathing drills to try and improve those positions. You know, just to try and get you set up in a better position. Like, you know, I go back to like a front rack, for example, and doing thrusters, like helping someone prime to make sure that the thorax can open when loaded like that. And in that certain position, we try to do like a lot of tempo breathing in those positions prior to warm up, just to try and drill it so that just doing it for a warm up without being conscious of the breathing, the coordination and timing that you're doing, it's not going to really translate. So we'll put them in those positions. We'll have them hold a cadence to make sure that they know what it feels like to actually maintain an upright posture and take a big breath of air while inhaling with, you know, in the bottom of the squat, which is a really tricky thing to do. And if they get in the bottom and as soon as they try and breathe in air, they're so slouched and crunched, they're starting to understand and feel why thrusters blow them up. It's because, well, you can't get any oxygen in there because your diaphragm and your thorax is like weak in that position.
Yeah, it's
and just doing more thrusters just kind of layers on top of that dysfunction. So
yeah, it's like I think Gray Cook uses the analogy of just like repeatedly hitting save on a shitty Word document.
Yeah, you can't fix dysfunction with more dysfunction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always a challenge because you're like, okay, well, we need to train this stuff and it needs to be hard for you, but we don't just want to keep pushing you down the rabbit hole of doing things the wrong way over and over again. So it's a push-pull between figuring out where the balance is there. Yeah,
and you got to pay attention to what's working. Movement's tough because it just takes a little bit longer, but you know, constantly on the search to make that more efficient and faster.
Yeah. So we talked earlier about some content creation stuff coming out of Training Think Tank, and you had a stint as podcast host running the Barbell Shrug podcast for a while.
About a year.
Yeah. Do you miss the weekly interviews and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, I do. You know, it's funny. Like I love doing podcasts, but I always get like nervous and uneasy when I'm interviewed because I'm just so used to asking the questions. You know, I'm always like self-conscious about my delivery, but I really miss.
Is it because you were always harshly judging the people you were interviewing, so you think that they're harshly judging you?
No, I don't like being in a seat as trying to, I don't know, as like a professor of knowledge. You know, I feel better trying to extract information from people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's just more comfortable for me, which is another way of me saying I don't feel that smart.
Well, I think it's also it's a different. I don't know what the right word is, but yeah, some people feel much more comfortable kind of in that, like, hey, here's the experts, like I'm going to set them up, tee them up for you to learn from. And other people feel more comfortable being like, here's my system, here's the way I do it, ABC, like listen to me.
Yeah. Some people have their shit together when you interview them. They don't just wing it.
Yeah. Like, here's my PowerPoint.
I miss hosting. It was a lot of fun. I liked meeting a lot of people, and you know, man, some of the people I interviewed were really great guests. Like, they were very open-minded and were willing to open up to our audience. You know, like Cal Dietz was one of my favorites. Like, he's the man in the strength and conditioning world. And, you know, we're pretty much like a CrossFit podcast, you know, like a different world. And he was just really cool and open-minded to share and make sure that our audience understood what he's saying. Like, And I learned a lot listening and interviewing these guys. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that I think I remember that Cal Dietz episode. I think I remember he spent a lot of time talking about like glute activation relative to the big toe. Was that in that one?
Yep.
Yeah. That's cool. It's a good episode. That guy's super, super smart.
Yeah, I read his book after that. It's fantastic.
The triphasic training one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use that a lot in my strength designs.
There you
really
go.
Effective. Yep.
Yeah. Do you use it like pretty, I guess like literally from the way he has it written, or do you kind of adapt it?
Adapt it. I mean, I can't, I'm not training just power lifters, or I'm not training just football players. And I'm adapting it based on, very specific to some athletes that it would fit and flow with their design.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I've used some of those concepts as well in terms of being able to add more work with specific movements, like either focusing specifically on isometric pieces or like on the super slow eccentric or like the more speed based stuff without just being like, all right, cool, you're going to back squat at 85% 3 days per week.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot more, I guess, flexibility in terms of the way you're stressing whoever you're training, if you can play with some of those variables too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess to get back to the content creation stuff, so you kind of brought CTP on board at Training Think Tank, and he's sort of run with it and created a bunch of stunning videos and all that sort of stuff. And you get to interview Max now and sort of ask him some questions and try to extract knowledge from him. What do you see the role of content creation in, I guess, the fitness business now, right? It's super saturated. There's so much stuff out there, but you need to be able to create a message that's going to resonate with people. How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but for me, I'm constantly racking my brain around it, because it's like, you want people to pay attention and hear what you have to say, but at the same time, you don't want it to become watered down, and you don't want to make content just for the sake of making content. And we've got a lot of ideas like that we've shut down because it was like, all right, are we doing this just because we feel like it's necessary to put more shit out? So I mean, honestly, I think a mixture of really staying focused on what you're actively working on and what you feel that like the people need to see, like if there's value, and then also a mix of it having to be something that you're excited to put out there. I mean, I would say like that's probably two of the main principles that I try and pay attention to when working with these guys when we make stuff.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, how do you find the balance then between stuff that you think is interesting and relevant to potentially you as someone who's, a high level competitor yourself, an expert, a coach, all that, versus what may be interesting to like a perceived audience, right? So, I mean, for example, we just spent 20 minutes talking in detail about various modalities of respiratory training. And I think that that's awesome. And I'm super stoked about that. I looked up some of the stuff we talked about previously about that, but I have no idea, of the people who are going to listen to this. Like most of them are probably like, what are you guys even talking about? But it's a weird dynamic of like, how much do you want to cater and how much do you want to just sort of like explore your own interests? Yeah.
I mean, first, I think it comes to having a pretty good idea of who your audience is. And I think the better you can understand that, the more you can feel like you're talking to people, your friends, and you're like, hey, I think they'll really like this. This is my close community and like my audience. So I have a pretty good confidence that what we make they'll like, and it's something that they're interested in. And then next is I just ask Chris, because I'm absolutely terrible at that. Like I said, what I think is cool, he's like, no.
Like what?
I mean, just, if I'm like, let's make a video on IMT training, he's like, no one's going to, So, I mean, Chris is a great filter for that, because he's really good at making sure it's top-notch quality, and like that we are putting out something that like, he can sense passion. If he sees right away that one, like we're not really fired up and excited about making it and putting it out there, he's going to stop it right there. Like he'll just be like, no, we're not doing this right now. And then two, I mean, he's just got a good filter on what he feels like the audience wants to hear that is also relatable and digestible. Like people don't like being talked to, with science like way too far over their heads. And then I don't know, you get the balance sometimes, or some people are like, you don't have to talk to us like dummies, we get it. So, I mean, he's pretty good at helping out find a middle ground with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, not only is he actually, behind the camera and filming this stuff and editing it, et cetera, but he himself either, is able to use his own taste, like as like, okay, would I enjoy watching this? Or he has potentially a good map in his head of like, okay, this is what the audience will actually resonate with.
It's not even sometimes the content. Most of the time, the content's great. Like the material itself is awesome. It's the delivery. Like, how can we put this out so that people do gain interest and can digest it easily and like, enjoy it and be entertained by it too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I think that, something else that you guys do is you'll solicit questions and then answer a bunch of them and you'll fire them at Max. And it's a lot of the times it's super interesting because, the question itself is not something that Max wants to answer, right? He's like, I don't like this question, but like, let me try to help out, right? So that's kind of a dynamic there as well, where you're like, okay, this is what the audience is thinking, and we don't like that. So how can we give them something that's related to what they're thinking, but make it a little more, in line with what we believe or something to that effect?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. It's always like a weird balance there to figure out, how much to,
how fun do we make this too?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point, because you can make anything fun and then people are going to be more interested in it, even if it is potentially like dense or difficult or something like that. I guess a question for you is also, do you have that desire to sort of like create your own stuff as well? I mean, you've written some articles. I mentioned one at the beginning that I thought was super insightful, especially for people potentially coming down off of like, okay, I had like a specific training goal and a specific training journey. Do you have that desire to like create more stuff and interview people and put more stuff like that out there again?
You mean like creating content? I like being involved with what we make here. I would say like that's fulfilling the desire I have for as much as much that is being put out right now. My focus right now is to build for a little while and not necessarily throw it out yet. So one of the goals when I moved here is like I want to put my head down and study and read and focus a little more and like really dive into growing as a coach, which to me means like I needed to put the brakes on trying to present material and actually get it out into the world. So like, the IMT progressions, for example, I built this program that I thought was really helpful. I'm like, I realized that there's not many people that have laid out basic breathing progressions that's related to CrossFit that you could use various devices. And I thought it was valuable. I haven't put it out in the public yet. It's going to be in the movement course, or it is in the movement course. So like just making, little things like that, just that kind of go along with what I'm learning at that time is really like the peak of what I'm trying to create and do right now, like, or at least like the most of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is your focus in studying? Is it all the breathing stuff, or do you have kind of other stuff you're working on as well?
It really so I used to like, someone would recommend a book, and my how I learn has shifted, or at least my interests. Someone would recommend a book and I would try and go read it, and I just couldn't make myself really get into it at that time. I find that I'm more motivated to learn something when I'm presented with a problem that needs a solution. So if I have a client that has an issue with something that I don't fully understand, that is what motivates me on a whole new level to go and learn and research and get new books. And I'm just like, I just tear through it 10 times faster that way. And I don't know, I find a better flow with learning that way instead of just feeling like, all right, this one was in line, so I have to go read that now. I'm just not motivated the same way. I'm really weird in the sense that like someone's like, hey, I really want an article about this. I'm going to be like, I'm going to try and go write that. It might take me a while, but if you say, what do you want to write about? Well, let me pick something I'm currently interested in the moment. I'm just going to fly through it and get it done much faster. So it's, what I mean? Like it's, I don't know. I don't want to call myself an artist, but like if you tell an artist to go paint something for you, a lot of them will get turned off. They're like, let me do something that's natural and what's in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, if there's a context for you to be learning something or creating something, then it's much easier to kind of go down that path.
Yeah. I come from an engineering background. So like if it's presented as a problem that needs a solution, I'm just much more motivated to get it done that way.
Which flavor of engineering?
Mechanical.
Nice. I have a chemical and biomolecular engineering degree.
And now we're in fitness.
Yep. Oops. Whoops. Oh, well. And actually to your point too, I think that, myself, I've been creating much more content, podcasts and articles and all that kind of stuff, which has absolutely cut massively into a bunch of time that I used to spend like reading and learning and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that, I used to take in much more stuff, but now a lot of that time is like, all right, I need to edit this podcast and write the email to send to the list to like get it out there. So it's you do have to prioritize what you're actually doing.
Yeah, I think you gotta go back and forth in it, or you start having people help with it. Like you plant some seeds, and now it's time to harvest a little bit. Like you've built up the information, and now it's time to share it. I would say that I want to build for a while right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been trying to give myself like specific targets to work on, kind of like you mentioned.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have to have it be like, oh, it's related to this specific problem, but
Yeah.
I used to kind of, like you were saying before, just have lists of stuff like, all right, I'm going to read this book next, and like, okay, I'm going to listen to every podcast that I have downloaded, and okay, I saved these articles to my desktop, so I'm going to read them. And especially in 2018, you can just, those lists just fill up forever. And they never actually, like, you're never making progress. So you're just like,
the reality. I mean, I have education goals, I guess I'd say, that or tasks that I set daily. Like I read the mass research articles. I try to read at least one a day, just so I'm constantly reading some type of research. I'm always trying to make sure I'm in some type of training book. I used to put a lot of pressure to read more training related stuff way more often. But what I wasn't paying attention to was actually whether or not it was making me a better coach. You know, like I felt confident as a coach because I felt like I knew more. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know if I'm applying this any better than before I knew any of it. And like that is a problem to me, because otherwise, like that just felt like a waste of time. I'm like, I really have to pay attention to make sure like what I'm learning and reading, I'm applying, and like that it's actually working. Like just because you learned it and read about it doesn't mean you have to apply it, because it may not work. It may not work with the shit. Like, be okay with reading something and discovering that it's what you don't need to do.
Yeah. And do you find that you're able to take information that you potentially read or take in from a course or something and actually apply it? I find that that's a skill that some people have, and other people find that very difficult to like bridge that gap and make that connection.
Yeah. Again, it kind of goes back to like if I have a problem that I need to help solve, or if I'm looking for a solution of something, a solution. Yeah. I'm a lot slower going through the book. I go through, I make sure I build a lot of notes. I try to build systems or protocols out of that book to make sure that like it's something that I can go back and use as like a resource. So in my I have a training document with all my training resources that are all tabbed differently for different areas of training. Breathing, plyometrics, powerlifting, strength work, like whatever it is. I have it kind of categorized, and then I put whatever I learned from that book. How can I use this book to apply to the principles with how I write training design? And I try and throw it in there as like, a reminder to go and try these principles next time that problem, whatever the problem is that occurred, that might have use for.
Yeah, that's so you're very deliberate with trying to extract like, okay, these are the things that I want to actually apply.
Yeah, and then like sometimes, I mean, this book right here is actually, I haven't read this in a few months, but What We Need is Speed. I read this probably like, I don't know, 6-7 months ago. I don't remember taking anything out of this that I wrote down to put in that document as like a protocol or a system that I would use, except for till the very last page. There was something about, viewing training and the trying to avoid being dogmatic with how you view training designs is like basically the takeaway from that book. So like I read through the whole book. It's great on sprint mechanics and like, training sprinters. And then I got to the very end and I was like, well, I don't really have anything that I can use in my design specifically, but there was like a quote in the end that the guy had mentioned that I was like, well, perfect. I'm glad I read the book, because that was the takeaway. And it was, you get out of it sometimes what you don't expect. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, for sure. That there's almost always one or two things. I definitely been to seminars where I'm like, well, this is a stupid waste of time. But then there's like one or two things where you're like, that's a good cue, or that's a good idea. Yeah. And then it's worth it to accumulate those over time, even if not everything is like an immediately actionable item.
Yeah.
And I think also that you mentioned just kind of like accumulating stuff like knowledge that may not even be like immediately applicable, that I think a lot of that stuff too becomes valuable in terms of like building client relationships, like you mentioned, right? That a lot of times clients will have questions about stuff, and you as a coach should know about it, even if you don't actually apply it, right? Because it's like, oh, I want to try using like the West Side method. And like, you may think that that's a dumb idea, but you should probably know why that client wants to do that, where it came from.
Explain why it's a dumb idea.
Yeah. It's like, okay, here's the application of this method for powerlifting. Here's why they do it. Here's takeaways from it that might be valuable. You're a fitness athlete, so like you're not squatting in squat briefs. So like, let's not do this.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you see the same thing with nutrition too. Like nutrition is like pretty simple in terms of what most people need to do, but people are going to come to you and be like, "I've been doing the ketogenic intermittent fasting diet. Like, what should I do next?" And you're like, "Well, okay, hold on."
Keto and intermittent fasting? That sounds brutal.
Oh yeah. That's a literal thing that that recently happened to me. I was like, "Oh, okay."
Oh man.
How's that going?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, even if you think something probably doesn't have much use in your training, it's definitely good to research it and learn about it so that you can understand why to tell them no when they come to you.
yeah. Give them some like, okay, we're going to try to help you out on this one.
Yeah, I like that.
So tell me more about this movement course. I saw some of the videos come out on YouTube. What's going on with it?
What would you like to know? It's a massive course, man. Thing's a masterpiece.
Yeah. Why? I'm skeptical. I don't understand. Who cares about movement? I just want to work out.
Oh, there you go. Don't put me in the spot to sell this thing. That's Max, man. That's his baby. A lot of time and work and effort has been put into this thing. The original edition. Have you taken any of our courses before?
No, I haven't.
All right. So the original edition was fantastic, but a lot of people came to him saying, I learned a lot, but I want more application. So he's like, all right, Max is going to listen to the feedback. We got to rebuild it. I think they rebuilt it 3 times until they finally launched it, like literally refilmed everything.
Sounds brutal.
Yeah. So just this time, the amount of takeaway information in it relative to last time, the videos, the resources, really, it's called a movement course, but when I went through it just a few weeks ago, I was like, this is just a shift in how I view program design. Like my hierarchy on what I assess and what I deem as important on training qualities is shifted now. And that to me is like what makes it so valuable, is that it gives you an entirely different perspective and puts movement, the term movement and movement training, much higher on the pedestal, and gives it, just brings it as more of an importance in all the training qualities that are normally out there that, like you look at strength and endurance and all these things. Like, to me, I see movement as like the pure base now. And they say that like without good movement quality, you can't do anything. But like this truly explains why on a very deep level.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a lot of theory surrounding how to actually improve people's movement, and then theory in terms of where that fits in terms of a larger training structure, and then very practical and tangible application for how to potentially get someone better at specific issues that may arise. Is that kind of the idea?
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then a lot of different avenues that you probably normally wouldn't explore, like going into the breathing mechanics as well. Like they put a lot of time and effort and research into it. Yeah, man. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I think that the concept of training movement is something that it's really easy to make both types of errors on, in terms of not focusing on it at all and just being like, whatever, like I'm just going to push through, and like I'm a powerful, gifted athlete who can just deal with it. It's totally fine. And then you get the other side where people are terrified to do anything. So they're like, oh no, like, I'm my knee's caving in, or like I'm in extension, like I can't, whatever, and there's a sweet spot in the middle that, anyone who's trying to train seriously is going to have to be able to find.
Yeah. You're going to walk away with a much deeper level of understanding on different areas that you wouldn't normally have paid much attention to, in terms of having a better relationship with pain. Like, a lot of people, everything's fine, but they're very reactive when it comes to training in terms of when they get hurt, and they just have no idea how to cope and how to manage with dealing with injuries and pain. And the movement course is the proactive way of helping with that. There's no guarantee that like injuries aren't gonna happen, but how you react to them and what you know about your body and yourself and how to deal with it is like 100% in your control.
Yeah, for sure. That there's just too much, there's too many variables to know, okay, you're going to get hurt or you're not going to get hurt. It's not always obvious, like, oh, well, did I get hurt because of like, I twisted when I like lifted? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Like, who knows? But that
nothing may have been wrong. Sometimes it just happens, man. Like, it's tough.
Yeah. But that there's stuff that you can do to potentially reduce that risk. And then when it does inevitably happen, especially for anyone who's competing, that there's a lot of stuff you can do, based upon that, where it's like, not like, oh man, you tweaked a spinal erector, so now you have to rest for 2 weeks. Like, well, there's plenty of stuff you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a great course. Maybe I should sign up. Maybe I'll prioritize it in my learning hierarchy. I've been doing
it'll take you a couple weeks to get through.
Okay. Yeah, I've been doing like a nutritional biochemistry course.
Nice.
Which I think is really interesting. Actually, we were talking about engineering earlier, and I never learned we learned like very like microbiology in terms of like transportation of, like concentration gradients across like membranes and stuff like that. And we learned like, general elective macrobiology, but learned like nothing actually applicable to like human health and performance. So I don't know anything about like hormones or enzymes or anything like that. So it's like this gap in the middle that would actually potentially be helpful that I just know nothing about.
Yeah, that's what this course will help with.
Yeah. I mean,
cool.
we'll find out.
Yeah,
I just started it.
Is it like an online course or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this guy Chris Masterjohn who puts out a ton of like relatively dense nutritional content. And he's also a professor who teaches like nutritional biochem courses. So he essentially just like recorded the lectures that he would give to his students and put them on YouTube. And it's like, I mean, it's a dense science course. So it's like, it's like an actual, like, here's the Krebs cycle, here's the different things, like here's the diagrams of the molecules and all that kind of stuff. But it's something that I'm like, you know what? I really wish I knew this. So I'm pretty happy to be going through it.
Cool. Man, the deepest I read on nutrition related stuff is Alan Aragon's research articles.
Oh yeah, sure.
Out.
Yep.
You subscribe to those?
Yeah,
they're fantastic.
Yep. Yeah,
cool.
That's one of the better aggregations of studies and things like that.
Nice.
Yeah, I wish I did a better. Actually, like I was talking about earlier, that's something that I used to read very regularly, and now it's kind of like, okay, I'll get some of them and skip some of them, but that's a high quality newsletter.
Yeah, I like opening them if something sticks out to me. Like I go, I'll dig into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, this has been a pleasurable chat.
Yeah, man, this was fun. I appreciate it. I'm glad you reached out. It's been a while since I've been on an interview, so it's always fun to chat like this.
I thought that they made you nervous and upset.
Nah.
Okay.
I'm just good at hiding it.
All right, cool. That sounds like a good skill to have.
It was a fun send off before this vacation. I was, good way to like end the week. Work is done. Now it's time to go chill for a little bit.
There you go. Shut the computer and hang out with some grizzly bears.
I don't know what I'm going to do. I haven't closed the computer like that, in, I don't know, a couple years. It's going to be great.
Yeah. I did it, maybe a year and a half ago, going to Argentina. And
nice.
it's kind of a weird thing where like your brain has to like recalibrate to not having like
constantly checking stuff.
Yeah.
Staring at the screen all day.
Yeah. It's like you just can't actually work right now. And you're like, but what if I
feel guilty.
Yeah. Yeah. And then after, like, for me at least, there was kind of a threshold past which you're like, oh, like okay, this is cool.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. Brought some books. I'm going to read The Oxygen Advantage. I don't know if you've read that one yet.
No, I've heard of it, but haven't read it.
The breathing book. It looks pretty interesting. Probably read The Alchemist again since I'm going on an adventure.
Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.